on behalf of US JETA and Pasona, I'd like to welcome everyone to our discussion. This is Beyond Jet, linking Japan to your next career. And I know we have people joining us from both the US and Japan. So for those of you in the States, thanks for spending part of your Friday evening with us. And for those of you in Japan, thanks for getting up on a Saturday morning to join us. My name is Jessica Livingston. I'm the Executive Director of US JETA and of course a proud JET alumni, Hokkaido 2003 to 2006, which was lovely. I've spent the last 20 plus years engaging with and serving with serving the US-Japan Alliance through a variety of positions, but I've always held the JET and JETA community, close to my heart and been pretty closely engaged with it. As many of you know, US JETA is a nonprofit with the mission of strengthening US-Japan relations through providing opportunities and support to our really extensive JET alumni network, which is now over 40,000 strong just in the United States. So we're a very large, you're part of a very large network. And tonight's event is really for all of you JETs who have recently returned or are getting ready to return or are just thinking about what you're going to do after JET, and who are interested in continuing your relationship with Japan through your professional, your next professional step. We're really delighted to have two JET alumni, Laura Tanaka, she was Osaka from 2017 to 2020, and James Williams, Hyogo, 2008 to 2012. And they are here, they work for Pasona and they're with us from Pasona. Pasona has been a dedicated US JETA corporate sponsor since last year. And it's really been a win-win relationship, I think. They're looking for talent to fill roles in Japan-related companies and positions, and we have this exceptional talent pool of folks looking for those jobs. So the icing on the cake is really having, Laura and James, who are JET alums, who truly understand this community, and they really support, the desire to serve as a bridge between the US and Japan in professional settings. So all three of us, James and Laura and myself, have been in your exact shoes. Coming back from JET is really, really hard, arguably much harder than actually going to Japan on JET. And so they're going to share what they've learned from their own experience of coming back and now working with a recruiting company that specializes in Japanese business connections. So I am going to hand it over to Laura and James and just give them a big thank you for presenting this evening.
Thank you so much for having us, Jessica. And yeah, I actually did JET and I was working at a Japanese company in Japan for a couple of years after. So I came back in 2022. I'm still pretty new back. James has done a variety of things, so I'm going to let him tell more about what his background is. And I'm actually also a local chapter member of the US JET Alumni Association of the Southeast. So this is really something I do in professional life, also private time. So it's been really a pleasure to get to know Jessica and Julia from the US JET AA team. And we're excited for the presentation tonight. And I'll let James take it away because he is the master and commander of the PowerPoint tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. I've done a lot of things after leaving JET. A lot of this information we're going to be presenting today is stuff I definitely wish that I had known because I had to learn it all the hard way. I've done translation, interpretation, I've done engineering, though I have no engineering background. I've done purchasing, and this is my 7th year doing recruiting specifically for Japanese companies. But yes, since we've got a lot of material to cover and not a lot of time, let's go ahead and jump into it. Let me get this going. This is kind of the view of what we're going to be talking about today. And as Jessica said, there will be plenty of time for Q&A at the end. But we're going to get, we already talked about Pasona, so I'm going to skip that. We're going to start with the market update. And I've done a few of these seminars and a few of these market updates. This one is the hardest I've ever had to do because there's so much happening. I didn't bother start to write it until the start of this week, and I've already had to revise it 4 times, including once today. Now, because of that, we are going to be focusing on big picture trends. because not everything that happens in the economy has an immediate effect on the job market. The job market tends to lag a little bit behind economic trends as people are responding to them. Now, if you have some uncertainty about where the market is right now and what the economy is, and if we're all going to die in a terrible, fiery market collapse, you're in good company. I don't think most people are expecting the worst case scenario right now, but companies are having a lot of trouble knowing what direction things are going to go. We've seen some very big companies either withdrawing their quarterly or annual projections. We've seen them issuing multiple ones saying, well, it could go this way, it could go that way. And we've had some just throw up their hands and say, we have no idea, we're going to have to wait and see. Now, because the situation is so uncertain, companies aren't sure what type of talent they're going to need, if they are going to need talent, if they're going to be facing layoffs. They don't know because there are so many potential directions this could take. And of course, the biggest factor in this uncertainty right now is the tariff war situation. When you don't know if the components that go into your product are going to shoot up by 300% or 10% or 50% or anywhere in between, it's hard to make long-term plans.
May I
Now,
chime in, James?
absolutely.
I will also say, generally speaking, Japanese companies have a much lower margin of profit than American companies. So they tend to be a little bit more cautious in comparison to American companies as a result, because they don't really do layoffs. So it also is good for you if you do find yourself at a Japanese firm. There's likely not going to be a layoff if you are in, but it also makes it harder to get in during these times.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Because if we're looking at the wider economy, there is a decline in new payrolls where companies are adding new positions and hiring new people to fill them. It is hitting the Japanese companies particularly hard. Now, if they have a critical staff quit, they're still going to hire someone to replace that critical staff, but they're going to ask themselves very carefully, do we actually need someone? If they get a new contract and they need to staff up in order to support a new customer, they're going to hire people, but they're going to hire as few people as possible because they're not sure which way the wind is going to blow. So it's not a great market to be a candidate in right now. It's not a market where you're going to get 100% of everything on your wish list. It's a market where you're going to have to think about what is really a must-have and what is really a nice-to-have. Now, you might see some people talking about a rise in unemployment, and that is technically true. Unemployment is up right now. The majority of that, however, is due to the federal government layoffs under the Department of Government Efficiency. If you control for those numbers and look at the rest of the, especially private sector, unemployment is not up that much. There have been a few rounds of layoffs in the tech sector, but if you can tell me a time in the last 30 years when there were not layoffs in the tech sector, I will be very surprised. One other trend on the not so good column that's worth mentioning, full remote positions. We get asked about these a lot. Full remote is almost fully dead. We do see a few fully remote positions here and there. It's usually either contract-based work or for specialists with highly desirable knowledge and experience. And you'll have a company that wants to compete on full remote option instead of competing on salary. Now, so that's the not so good news. And the good news is that we can now talk about the good news, although there'll be a few asterisks there as well. One good thing is that while there was a bit of the market did react very poorly to the Liberation Day tariff announcements, the market has mostly recovered from that and is starting to grow back above the pre-Liberation Day levels. Now, and Laura pointed this out to me earlier, and I think it's an excellent point. We're still down compared to last year at this time. So we don't have a full recovery from some of the recent uncertainty, but I do think there's cautious optimism along a lot of among many people, especially since a lot of the tariff agreements, for example, with the UK or the temporary ceasefire of tariffs with China, and potentially the federal or the trade court blocking the tariffs altogether. There's still a lot of uncertainty, but I do think the general mood is that we've seen the worst of the tariff situation and things are going to keep moving in that direction.
I think it's going to shake out probably in the next 6 months. So it actually is probably good time for jets when they're coming back, to be honest, because there have been so few hirings this year. It means they're probably going to do more mass hirings next year if the tariffs do shake out. So those are things to keep in mind as well, because I know even this month with the new budgets, even though we have had some dips in certain needs, we've still placed several jets. I know James and I actually this month, I think we helped 4 jets find jobs.
Yeah.
So it's not impossible. So we don't want to scare you, but we just want to have you to know kind of the pros and cons.
Well, and some of the other good things we're going to be talking about are particularly good for jets. Placing 4 jets in 1 month, that's really good, even for a company that specializes in recruiting for Japanese companies. So it's not all doom and gloom. One of the things that is working in candidates' favor is that there has been a very large drop-off in voluntary resignations. People do not want to switch jobs right now unless there is going to be a very, very big raise in salary. Because there's uncertainty, everyone knows that if the economy goes the wrong way, there could be layoffs. And if there are layoffs, they're going to get rid of the new hires first. So people are not moving jobs unless they really have to. How this works in your favor is that this means it's also not an employer's market. We're having to have the same hard conversations with employers that we're having with candidates. We're having to say, look, that people on the job market, that's what there is. You're not going to be able to headhunt unless you start paying 10, 20, 30K more than what you're paying your current staff, because nobody wants to move if they're in a stable situation. So this is a negotiator's market. This is a time for both the candidates and the companies to come to the table and say, what is actually a must-have? Because if you walk away from the table, it could be 6 months, 12 months, 24 months before the next good opportunity comes around. One thing that is working heavily in Jet's favor is the local worker advantage. A lot of companies are very cautious right now about hiring people who need visa support, which I felt a little bad putting that in the good category. But with the second Trump administration, looking back at the first Trump administration, there's a very good chance that immigration, the Department of Immigration, is going to have very long lines, and there will be very long waits before people can get work authorization, even if they're entitled to it. Because of this, Japanese companies, being very cautious, are tapping more into local talent.
Specifically local talent who knows Japanese culture or the language.
Exactly, because they still need people who can work in that environment. And a lot of this is being driven by a pretty big expansion in manufacturing, particularly in the South, Southeast, Southwest, Texas, that whole area. Now, we get asked sometimes if this is related to the tariffs, and the answer is mostly not. A lot of this stuff is semiconductor manufacturing. That's been in motion since the Biden administration. That's due to the situation with China stepping up its saber rattling towards Taiwan, and the importance of semiconductors with the new AI stuff. There was a lot of automotive stuff that was already being reshored to the US, again, under Biden, under the first Trump administration. It's because of the political instability and cartel situation in Mexico. A lot of automotive manufacturers were getting increasingly uncomfortable with the stability of that supply chain. So the good news is, because this isn't because of the tariffs, even if the tariffs go away, this trend is going to continue because what was driving it is still in play. If the tariffs do stick around, I do think it will encourage more of it. But again, the trends were already there.
And there's also a trend to hire local HR managers as well, not focusing as much on relying on the expats. So that also aids in the fact that there's more Americans at the helm for the hiring decisions. Oftentimes, they find themselves in need of somebody who knows Japanese culture, either at the basic level, we're just being sensitive to the culture, or also knowing the language as well. So just keep those things in mind because this is happening now throughout the United States. Some areas such as California and New York, which were predominantly run by Japanese expats, are now actually localizing. So this really is becoming more and more of a market. And that's also why places like Pasona are now integrating more Americans at the helm, because people like James and myself obviously think differently than the Japanese native speakers. And that's good. We should all work together on both receptive sides to make a better relationship between the two countries.
Absolutely. And that takes us very nicely into our Japanese companies specific overview, Japanese companies in the US. The big headline here is the shift towards local hires and local leadership. With the unprecedented inflation in Japan and the yen continuing to struggle, it has become more important than ever for Japanese companies to have their foreign subsidiaries do very well and expand their business outside of the Japanese economy. We have a lot of companies that traditionally only supplied to Japanese automotive manufacturers, now trying very aggressively to supply, the big three American automotive manufacturers. And to do that, you need local staff. Now, looking at the last 365 days of new job orders that companies have been looking to fill with bilingual candidates and looking at which ones where JETS did the best, the clear winner is in sales. There has been a very aggressive move to get bilingual, bicultural people who can work with the Japanese side of the company and work with local American customers, because of this importance of reaching out to local markets. Interpretation and translation are also pretty hot right now, particularly interpretation. You don't see a lot of translation-only roles anymore. This is being driven mostly by the manufacturing expansion. You have new plants, you need new translators. Admin, administrative assistant, and general clerical, Excel monkeys are also pretty popular right now for bilingual candidates. The last two things on there, the accounting, banking, financial, and engineering, we do get a lot of bilingual roles in these fields, but we don't see as many JETS that have this academic background. And these are things that in general, you need a specific academic background or training, formal education in order to break into. So if you're thinking about upskilling or reskilling or something along those lines, these are fields to consider because there is a particular demand for bilingual, bicultural people in them.
I would also like to add in the sales roles are not all aggressive sales. Sometimes they are inside sales and outside sales. So inside sales is primarily, at the office, maybe not as aggressive because I do know there's a lot of reluctance for a lot of JETS when they hear the word sales, they run the other way. But it is something that it's not just inside or outside. This is a combination of the two.
Yeah, and we'll talk more about these specific types of roles actually in the next section.
Yeah.
So industries and roles. I mentioned there were a lot of things I wish I had known coming out of JET, looking into job hunting. And this is really the number one thing that I wish I had known was what roles are there out there that aggressively hire bilinguals and what industries are they in? Because if you know those things, it's a lot easier to search for something that's going to be a good fit for what you're looking for. And you can make that match between what you're looking for and what the company needs. If we're talking about industries that highly recruit Japanese bilinguals, it's industries where there are a lot of Japanese companies in the US. So whether we're talking about Japanese companies or American companies, there is a desire for people with these skills. The big one, of course, is manufacturing, particularly automotive manufacturing, although semiconductor manufacturing is also particularly hot right now, as well as capital equipment, manufacturing equipment. Those are all doing very well, and there's a lot of demand. Logistics is also having a little bit of a surge in order to support the manufacturing industry. You know, after you make that, whatever you're making, someone has to ship it to the customer. That's where logistics comes in. Trading companies, import, export, normally those are very good industries. The tariffs have slowed that down a little bit right now, but once that stabilizes, you know, the trading companies and import-export companies, those are extremely important for supplying all of the other industries. So it's going to bounce back. Beyond that, it's kind of depends on the area of the country you're in as to where there's going to be the most opportunities. And we're going to talk about that in a separate section.
I will also add to James's thing, a comment that we get from a lot of Jets is, oh, I want to go into education or I want to go into government. Pasona, what we primarily work with is the private sector. So we are not going to be the best point of contact for people who want to go into the government, although there are people that we know who are in that way, and we are happy to direct you to them. So this is specifically for the private sector that we're talking about today.
Yeah, for something like that, you know, networking with fellow Jet alumni is probably going to give you more bang for your buck for government and education in particular.
Yeah. I'm going to jump in real quick and say if folks are interested in government related jobs, the Jet AA Washington DC chapter, Jet AA DC, runs a lot of government focused career panels and things like that. So you definitely want to follow them and jump in on those.
In education, there are a lot of Jet alumni that actually do career coaching that are in education sectors. So they also are a great point. So just letting you know, because that was something after the last seminar we got a lot of questions on. We're not going to be the best point of contact for sending you back. Also, these are for jobs that are localized in the United States rather than jobs that send you back to Japan.
Okay, so that's kind of the overview of the industries. Let's talk a little bit more about specific roles and who they might be a good fit for. So we touched on this a little before. A lot of people have a very negative image of sales because the only type of sales they have experience with is aggressive people trying to sell them things they don't need. The type of sales that we're talking about here, where they're looking for bilingual, bicultural individuals, is a very different type of sales.
Not the
So to
NHK.
take,
It's
yeah,
not the NHK.
not the NHK guy, yeah. You know, if you think about a company like Toyota, they build cars, they don't make tires. They buy the tires from another company. And if they don't get those tires from somewhere else, they're not going to be able to make the cars. They're just going to sit there and not go anywhere. So you're not trying to sell someone something they don't need. You're selling them something they have to buy somewhere in order for their company to fulfill its purpose. This is business to business, B2B sales. It's not about using high pressure tactics in order to trick someone into buying your product. It's about deeply understanding the customer's needs and their goals and finding ways that your company can support that and build a relationship that's going to last for decades, not just getting the next sale. So it's a very different approach than the type of sales most people are related to. That said,
yeah.
go ahead.
Some people even only have one company they work with. Like a lot of our clients that they're looking for, maybe they only work with Toyota. Maybe they only work with Subaru. So it's not like you're going to a mass number of people. It really is a very small, very pointed area.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, that being said, it does generally, people who are a little bit more extroverted do tend to do better at this because it is very people focused. So I'm not going to say it's for everyone. But one of the other good things about it is it's in terms of jobs you can do as a bilingual person that don't require a specific degree, where you can make a lot of money and not really have a cap on your career growth. Sales is one of the best options.
I know a bilingual sales guy made 200K last year.
Which is not bad at all.
Yeah.
Admin and clerical, we do get a lot of this. This is your basic office job, working with Excel on a computer, doing data entry, filling out forms, dealing with paperwork. On the administrative assistant side, for bilingual people, it's often combined with some translation or interpretation duties as well. And while I'm not going to push this as much as a career path, if you're dealing with Japanese companies, it is a very good entry-level opportunity. Japanese companies tend to have, sorry, my cat's walking in front of my screen. That's what that was. A lot of Japanese companies prefer to promote from within. They have a lot of internal mobility within the company. So if they have a bilingual person in this type of role that shows a lot of promise, is a hard worker, it's easier to transition to other roles within the company than it would be to apply from the outside. Let's see here. Next, accounting and finance. We touched on this a little already, but why are they specifically interested in bilingual, bicultural people? Well, if you can communicate with the home office as well as the local people about the money, you are a very, very important part of the company's operations. And what's more important than the money to a company? Again, as we said, specific degrees, specific certifications are generally required for this type of role. Every now and then you'll see some entry-level accounts payable, accounts receivable roles, but that's about it. So yeah, again, if you're thinking about upskilling or reskilling, this is a very good field for bilingual, bicultural people. Next, purchasing and supply chain. Purchasing is kind of reverse. Yeah.
Can I interrupt here? Because this is actually something I think is a great question from Brianna. Is this feels like a weird question. It's not a weird question. Defining bilingual. There are a variety of bilinguals. So when we think about full bilingual, think about, can you go to a business meeting in Japanese in Keigo? Yes or no? That's usually around the JLPT N2 level. That is a full bilingual business level. That being said, a lot of our roles do not require full bilingual capability. A lot of them are just conversational. Can you talk about the weather? Can you talk about your favorite food? Can you talk about your hobbies? That's conversational bilingual ability, probably around the N3 level. When you are looking at sales roles, usually what they're looking for is around that N3 level, because they're looking for a very strong English speaker who can attract the companies from a B2B standpoint. When you're looking at something like accounting, they're going to want that N2 or even N1, because you'll be talking with the headquarters in Japanese, sometimes using Japanese like, Sinmon Yogo, which is like, very, very technical terms. So that is another reason why sales have been very, very accessible for Jets, because usually they get in at a lower level for language. They get into the company, they learn better, they get that into, and then they go to another company after 3 or 4 years and get a much higher paycheck, and then also get much more opportunities. So that's the pattern I see a lot of. And it's amazing to see one person from 1 year to the next, their levels change dramatically. That's a great question, and I'm sorry for cutting you off, but I thought it was
thank you. I think that's important. I'm going to start adding that as we go through this. For purchasing supply chain, if we're talking about hiring someone specifically for bilingual ability, we're looking at around an N2 for this as well, because the value here is that you can talk to Japanese suppliers in Japan as well as local suppliers in America. So while they're not going to be as strict about using Keigo with this type of role, you need to come up to speed on the Senmon Yogo. Purchasing is good if
technical terms, that's the word.
Right, the technical terms, yeah. Purchasing is kind of reverse sales. This is the person at Toyota who decides who to buy the tires from. There's a lot of data analysis and production planning and supply chain. So we need to build this many cars by this date. So the parts need to arrive at the factory by this date. So it needs to leave the factory where it's made by this point. So we need to order it by this point. So it's about seeing the full chain that goes through the business's processes and doing in order to support lean manufacturing. This is another one where specific degrees are generally not required. Although there are some, it's not usually a big deal.
Well, and candidates who maybe have very high level Japanese but don't really have that aggressive sales usually find a lot of
Yes.
success here, and they absolutely love it. I've placed several people like that. One of our mutual friends, she does this, and she found that she liked it way more than administration because
Yeah,
you get to work with
yeah,
different stakeholders.
yeah. And it does let you see a lot of the company as well and its processes. You have to deal with everyone in your company too. Um, Translation and interpretation, as I said before, nowadays it's mostly interpretation and translation, not just one or the other. And to this one, I did include most companies probably aren't going to look at your resume unless you've actually passed the N2. It's not
Yeah.
enough to be self-assessed N2. They want to see that certification because unfortunately, Americans tend to vastly overrate our own language ability. One thing worth mentioning is that specialists make more money. If you are a medical translator or a legal translator or an accounting financial translator, you're going to make more money than pitching yourself as a generic, I can do anything type person. Because generally people who say they can do everything don't do much. It's also very good to combine this with a second skill set. So, a lot of companies will hire someone to do purchasing and interpretation, or sales and interpretation, or admin and interpretation. That way, a lot of interpretation positions, there tends to be a salary cap after about 3 to 5 years. And adding a second skill set is good for your career growth because then you can kind of specialize as a language professional and not run into that salary cap.
Yes, some people have done auditing as their
Yep.
their second thing, and they tend to do very well, and they can also then pivot towards the accounting direction.
Yes, yes, that's a great way to build up that type of experience. Engineering, we'll keep this simple, especially mechanical and electrical engineering. Specific degrees are usually required. So if you don't already have that degree, this is more something for upskilling.
But if you have an
IT,
N5 or an N4 and you want to do engineering,
oh,
you have that
I forgot.
background, you're going to be like hotcakes. You're going to be like, the new Pokemon in the shop. I mean, if you speak any Japanese, even like Ohio gozaimasu, they'll be like, yes, we take you. Hi.
Yes, yes, yeah, well, especially because you understand the concepts, not having that formal certification, you still know what you're talking about, and so yeah, they still want you. IT is in a weird place right now. If you've been looking for jobs in Japan, you probably see a lot of IT jobs for bilingual people there. Even people with like an N3, I remember seeing postings for people with N3 and 2. The situation is very different in the US right now. IT is in a bad place. There are a lot of layoffs. A lot of it is related to AI. And because most of the IT companies in the US are providing IT services to Japanese customers, they actually are requiring very, very high level Japanese ability, like N1 or higher is what we'll often hear, unless it's more like a like a IT support role.
I typically hear they prefer a native Japanese speaker for these roles.
Yeah, and it's because they're working almost exclusively with Japanese people at Japanese companies in the US. So it's not only is it hard to break into the IT industry right now in general, if recent graduates in IT are having a very difficult time right now, trying to break into it as Japanese as a second language, it's even harder to break into that niche.
You might as well probably find an English only position for that one, probably, my guess. Um, I mean, it's not impossible. It's just it's a very weird. I think I've had maybe in the past 2 years, I think I've placed 2 people in IT. That's it.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
And for reference,
Um,
I do about 2 to 3 people a month for, to 4 people a month. So that's 30, 36 months. So think about it that way.
Finally, we touched on this before. HR, especially bilingual HR, is very hot right now. For this, I feel like N3 maybe, N2
It's good.
definitely.
Yeah.
But because so many of these Japanese companies in the US, the senior leadership is on assignment from Japan. They need local HR professionals who can kind of be the bridge between management and workers and advise them on benefits packages, salaries, workplace standards, what American workers are used to. Um, Specific degrees and certifications are often required, but not always. And this is something, if you do get an entry-level role with a Japanese company, it's a lot easier to angle yourself into an HR role that way. If you try and come through the front door directly into an HR role, they might put more weight on the certifications and degrees. But if you're already part of the company, kind of understand it, and are bilingual, this is something that a lot of people move into.
Oh. Have you stuff creative careers yet? We don't see a ton of creative careers in the private sector. We do see some in marketing and that sort of thing. We don't typically get a lot of like graphic design or those kinds of roles as a general rule. That's just because that's not the needs of the current market. I know a lot of people who come back and they want to find a creative career like an artist or those kinds of things. We do know that there are a lot of places that have done that. However, it is not the general private sector needs. I do know several jets who have been very successful doing freelance work as designers or artists and things like that. But typically speaking, we don't see a lot of those roles in mass. And also, the video game industry is
Generally,
dying right now. So right now at this time for the gaming industry, I think I actually had a lady last year. She literally did the marketing rollout for Pokemon for 15 years in the United States, fully bilingual from Japan. She couldn't find a job. So right now it's just very hard in the video game industry. I get that a lot from Jets as well. I have never actually found anybody a job in the gaming industry, but I have talked with a lot of the gaming companies. They just are not hiring right now. They're in a more layoff and condensing stage.
well, and because there are so many people who are interested in Japanese language, who are also interested in the arts, whether that's graphic design, whether that's video games, whether that's general media, there's a lot of competition for those roles. So in general, they don't need to use a company like Pasona in order to find people for those roles.
Yeah.
When a new job goes up, they're going to have 2,000 applications within 24 hours.
And most of them are like N2 and one level, bilingual ability. Oftentimes have a lot of experience. Also in Japan, I actually applied for places like Konami and things like that. Unless you have extensive experience as a coder, it's extremely hard to get into that industry. I do know some people who worked at Konami, and they were coders and they were fine within like an N3. So yeah, but I agree with Casey's. Go into tourism or education in Japan. Yeah, so those are really good options. But Pasona, again, we are looking at jobs in the States. I know with my N2, I couldn't get into the gaming industry even if I wanted to. In Japan, I did apply and I didn't even get a resignation, didn't even get a response back.
Yeah, it's highly competitive, and frankly, a lot of the entry-level positions in those industries, whether we're talking about in the US or in Japan, pay starvation wages, just because there's so many people who are desperate to break in.
That being said, though, I do know some people who've done it and they've been really happy there. So it's a choice that you make.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
those are things that you have to decide. And you know, I actually used to want to go into the gaming industry. That's why I learned Japanese. I have to say I've found that I've made way more of an impact doing what I do right now because I'm working across industries and I'm working on broader cultural things. So even if you don't get what you really, really want right now, you can come back and start at maybe an adjacent industry and go there later on. Because once you've worked at one Japanese company, it's much easier to cross industries, especially if you're in something like admin or accounting, or sales, because if you've sold one component, you've sold another component. So please just remember that. So
Yeah.
we work with the companies in the United States. We do have a Japanese partner, but however, all of the companies that, you know, when we pass you to our headquarters in Japan, you actually have to have valid visa status in Japan. So you would have to reach out to Pasona in Japan directly, because we are based in the United States and those are the jobs we're looking at. Okay, let's go,
Okay.
James.
Yeah, let's move on to industries by and regions. And for that, I'm going to pass it over to Laura.
Yeah, so this will give you more idea actually about the industries and regions that we have in the States. So James, you can go ahead and I'll try to get through this pretty quickly. So automotive manufacturing companies, this is my bread and butter. I never thought I'd be working a lot with Toyota, Honda, all of them, and I absolutely love it. You get a blend of cultures, you get a blend of people, all kinds of different, you know, jobs. It's really been a lot more fun than I thought it was going to be. Um, and so we get roles primarily in the Midwest and the Southeast. Primarily Georgia, Texas, I would say Michigan gets a lot of jobs, Illinois, Indiana, and sometimes Ohio. But I also think there's one unsung gem in the United States that is like the golden land for jets, and that's Kentucky. Kentucky, if you are bilingual and willing to move to Kentucky, there are so many companies that are willing to train you up. James can speak from experience. That was his first job after coming back. I've placed 3 or 4 entry-level individuals in Kentucky. They've been trained by Toyota conglomerates in their various fields, and then they've left and gone on to other pastures. Anything from mechanical engineers. Tennessee is not as big as Kentucky, but Tennessee is also pretty good. And I will say the reason why is the supply and demand. If you look at the United States, think about California and New York. That is primarily where the Japanese population groups up. When you are in those states, if you are looking for a job that requires high-level Japanese, you will never be Japanese. Well, like, don't, no matter how hard you try, you won't be Japanese. So play to your strengths. There's places that are great for you. There's places that are great for others. But if you're looking for competitive advantage, you're just going to see a lot more options in the Southeast and Midwest, as a native English speaker. So let's go to the next slide. Entertainment. So this is going to be, I think, where a lot of jets want to go. I get asked this every time. California is overwhelmingly the leader due to Hollywood, of course. A lot of the gaming industry is in California. They have a little bit of everything. I will say it is also, though, very, very competitive if you are a native English speaker, if you are in these areas trying to find a Japanese company. Typically what we get is we get a lot of jets who come back. Maybe they want 60K or 70K and they find a job for like 45 or 50K in California, which is very, very low. I had a lady last year. She was, you know, wonderfully qualified, has passed N1, done translation for over 20 years. She was looking for around 100K in California for translation and interpretation, or even 80K, and she couldn't find anything there. So she actually moved to Tennessee for translation, and she's been very happy there. So
I was just working with a candidate who had been doing media interpretation for 10 years, and she was still stuck in just contract positions. So
and it's one of those things where I've seen people who've been very, very happy and very, very successful as well. These are the trends we're seeing because we work with so many candidates. I always recommend for JETs to be flexible where the opportunities are, and wherever the opportunities come, whether California, New York, Utah, Colorado, Texas, wherever, go where it goes. And they have a little bit of every industry in California as well. So we can go to the next one. Finance. I don't think most people from JET come from a finance background, but I would say that New York is definitely the finance capital of the United States. There are a lot of finance operations in California as well. Typically speaking, we do see a lot of needs for very high level Japanese ability in these spaces. That being said, if you are a financial professional and you are not in these spaces, we've actually had luck placing people who've done accounting in maybe other Midwest states. The finance companies, think about KPMG, think about banking companies, Sumitomo, Mizuho, all these, large conglomerates that do accounting and IT. Those industries also typically are very Japanized. So that's another thing that is difficult. I know for me, I don't prefer to work with finance companies because usually they're very particular and very Japanese way. Lots of calls at, 10 p.m. or emails at 10 p.m. So it's definitely run more in accordance with the Japanese way of life. Any other add-ins, James?
Yeah, no, it just tend to be very, very formal, very conservative.
But I've met some Jets that love it.
Well, some people like it, yeah.
So different strokes for different folks. And Pasona is also, kind of in the middle. So we also sometimes are more conservative as well. So let's go to the next one. Food and beverage companies. I think these are really cool because you're going to get a really just a hodgepodge group of people. You're going to get people that speak Chinese, Korean, Spanish, like all over the world. A lot of these food and beverage companies are focused in California or in states that are adjacent to a port. So you do get a lot of them in Georgia, primarily California. I do know for these roles as well, food and beverage companies are good about entry-level candidates, but their pay is usually a little bit lower compared to the other industries. So if you go to manufacturing or food and beverage typically pays less, but they also are way more friendly for entry-level people. So if you're trying to gather skills, it's a really good industry to start. Also, if you're not bilingual for Japanese, but maybe you speak Spanish or Korean or Chinese, this is another great gateway because a lot of these companies are looking for trilinguals or quadrilinguals, things like that. They do roles like business development, logistics, and customer service. And Crystal, we'll get to that question in a little bit. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Overseas government organizations. I want to just basically touch on this because we don't really work with a lot of overseas government organizations. The biggest overseas organization that we work with is JETRO. JETRO is kind of the organization that helps Japanese companies who are coming from Japan settle in the United States. Sometimes they have needs for hiring, but typically they prefer a Japanese native speaker. That being said, though, there are some centers where they need kind of an American counterpart as well. We do sometimes see them at the consulate general. Most of these roles are admin or executive assistant, maybe HR. I would say a very high level of Japanese is usually required, and also the salary is kind of lower. That being said, though, I do know some individuals who've been in that industry for a very long time, and they have now connected with pretty much everyone in the industry from Toyota all the way to Konami. So I think that that's pretty much it for the government organizations. Okay. And then IT companies, these are primarily in Texas and New York, the ones that I look at. California used to have a lot of IT, but that's been kind of dwindling down recently. Am I correct, James? Yeah.
I think to an extent, yeah, a lot of companies are moving. It's still a big hub, but a lot of them have been moving out just due to, well, taxes, cost of living.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I would say a lot of them are now localized more to Texas or New York. I do know that we get a lot of roles by, from like SaaS, cybersecurity. Typically speaking, the roles that we get from IT are either weird hours, so like night shift roles, maybe where they can't find somebody local, or bilinguals. I will also say for these roles, because the IT industry right now is so saturated, it's pushing wages down. So an IT professional that maybe was earning 60, 70K, that same role now is going for 50 or 60. And I recently had a friend transfer out of IT because his wage was lowered down to $19 an hour. So that is something that we need to think about as well.
Yeah.
Okay, and let's go to the
Okay.
next one. Logistics companies. I think logistics companies are also a really great entry for jets. Logistics companies typically are a little bit more on the Japanese side rather than the American side. I think when you're looking at industry specifics, manufacturing is one of the most global. Food and beverage is also pretty global. Logistics companies are also global, but they definitely follow some of the procedures of Japanese companies. They are everywhere in the United States. California, Texas, Georgia, Illinois, pretty much anywhere, even Tennessee, Kentucky has several logistics companies. Anything that a logistics company does, they do business development, import, export. I see a lot of roles there where they're just looking for somebody to get boots on the ground and learn. There's a lot of entry levels here. So something that is key for logistics companies is that Japanese understanding. They almost have a very hard time to work with people who've never been to Japan because you're going to constantly be getting goods in and out from Japan. There has to be that understanding of how things run in the States, but also how things run in Japan. Another great thing about logistics companies is if you don't speak any Japanese, but you have that cultural knowledge, you're good to go. You don't really need to have a high level at all. Yeah, California has the most jobs, of course. I think right now, Pasona, I think 30% or 40% of our jobs are coming from California. And we have the majority of our recruiters based in California. Typically, though, the placements are usually Japanese native speakers, I will say.
Yeah, and that I think that's important to bear in mind with this next slide as well. If you look at the top states, especially California and New York, that's also where you have the most competition.
So it's one of those things, though, too, if they are looking for a native English speaker, California is a good spot. I had a role about a year ago where they were looking for somebody who was a native Chinese speaker, and I found a lady who hit every single box. She just slid right in and it was totally fine. So, especially if you're a multilingual individual, California is going to be much easier. But I do know right now the highest concentration of Japanese population in the United States is going to be in California and New York. Where we typically find success with jets is places that really need the English native speaking and also where they need people with a cultural understanding. So if you
Yeah.
look at all of the other ones between 3 and 6, right? Texas, Georgia, Tennessee, Kentucky, they have so many Japanese companies. They have all these expats there, but they just don't have a Japanese population. And so you have these local people who are on the boots on the ground and they don't understand what's going on with the expat. And then the expat doesn't understand what's going on locally. This is where jets are so useful and so needed. Oftentimes, Japanese individuals don't want to move to these places, but Americans, we all come from different states, we all come from different places. And where jets have been very successful is they go into these more rural spots and they bridge the gap like jets do. And that's really been where Jessica and I've talked previously, is just because you're sent in the middle of nowhere for your first job doesn't mean that you have to be in the middle of nowhere forever. James went from Kentucky to Utah to Georgia. Um, we're looking at just trying to find the best bang for your buck, the easiest in for you, because when you come back from Jet, you're starting from ground zero. You want to go where there's the most plentiful opportunities, if possible. And a lot of these places will even pay relocation for you. So if you're living in Texas, they'll pay for you to move to Kentucky. Or if you're living in South Carolina, they'll pay for you to move to Tennessee. But just because you're there for 2 or 3 years doesn't mean you have to set down roots there. Oftentimes you stay there for a few years, and then if you get a job, maybe in California, you can go off to the West Coast.
And I do think that mindset is particularly important in a market like this. There are limited jobs on the market right now. I was working, one of my friends uh, could not relocate away from Georgia for various reasons. It took her about 2 years to find a permanent full-time job. And Georgia's one of the states where we tend to get a lot more positions. But because her only experience was in JET and similar things, it was a while before we were able to find her something that was the right fit. Yeah, it's if you have a must-have right now, it's very important that it is actually a must-have.
So, and I have seen some Jets come back and they immediately find a job too.
Yeah.
Typically the ones who find jobs very successfully, very quickly, are ones who have some flexibility in location.
Yeah, absolutely. And if they happen to be going back to one of these states that's particularly hot, sometimes you get lucky and get something right in your backyard.
That's a great question, Ashley. For states 7 to 10, there's usually not a lot of Japanese companies there. So, for example, Kansas right now is actually probably climbing because Panasonic is building a gigaplant there. But it is, generally speaking, not a lot of Japanese companies are there, or sometimes not even any. I think in Florida, there's
Yeah,
like 3 Japanese companies making the whole
yeah,
state.
yeah. I mean, Alabama might be moving up a little here in the next few years with the new manufacturing stuff. North Carolina is almost certainly going to move up. Tennessee might move up. South Carolina maybe. But yeah, if you look at like an Oklahoma or a Wyoming or a Montana,
And I would actually recommend, if you want to, if you're really specifically targeting Japanese companies, you can actually go to, even Chat GPT and ask which big Japanese companies are in this state. Because you'll find that there's a lot of them, and they do tend to group up. And yes, all of the Japanese companies in Florida are in Miami, and they're all right next to each other. So that's great.
small world.
So next slide. And yeah, so if you're in Miami, I think there's like 2 or 3 good ones. And there's like one random one in Tampa. I don't know why, but there's just one random one in Tampa. So I'm going to pass it back to James, and this is our last large section of the night, which is just cultural considerations. And I know this time, this session, we've been a little bit, I think, more straightforward than we were last year. And the reason why we were more straightforward this year, James and I have actually had a lot of negotiating with both clients and candidates, and just
Yeah.
trying to explain what the market is right now. And I think sugarcoating things is not good. But being really, we want you to find a job. We want you to find success. And in Oregon, like, there's no Japanese companies. I don't even think I think Yamasa is the only one that is even in Oregon that I've heard of. But our goal is to help you find a job if you want to do Japanese companies. If you decide to not work with a Japanese company, but work with an American company that uses Japanese, there are options for that too. Like Coca-Cola or Aflac or things like places like that. They sometimes hire Japanese bilinguals, but again, the need's much smaller than at a Japanese company. So those are the things we just want you to understand, is the supply and demand. And I promise you, we're having the same conversation with our clients as well. I told a client the other day, straight up, this person doesn't exist. I'm sorry. So,
Yeah.
so let's
Yeah,
take it from the
it's
cultural considerations.
okay. Yeah, and I do think this is something that's very important when thinking about where you want to work. I mean, we've been talking a lot about Japanese companies. Uh, they have their good parts and they have their bad parts, and it may or may not be something that you want to pursue ultimately. Personally, I've only worked with Japanese organizations after college, whether that, JET or private companies. Some of the things I really like, they tend to provide very good training for entry-level positions because they want you to stay with the company and move up the ranks and be part of their business community. There's a lot of room to advance, whether that's promotions or lateral moves to different departments where you can gain new skills. A lot of internal mobility. Right now I'm doing recruiting, but they also have me doing social media. They have me doing seminars like this. You get to, if you like having a little bit of different things on your plate, Japanese companies tend to be very good about that.
Well, and I started just as recruiting for, just a full cycle of recruiting, but now I'm doing a lot more of the consulting and working with clients, like specifically on the jobs and helping them make sure that their expectations are reasonable. So you get to move where you really want to go. But again, if you are at a Japanese company, you're looking at a much smaller piece of the pie compared to the American economy. And they do tend to group up in different states. So those are things you also need to be aware of.
Yeah, other things worth mentioning, Japanese companies tend to have very good benefits packages, maybe not
Amazing.
compared to tech company in Silicon Valley at peak tech, but compared to your more average American company, they tend to have very solid benefits. Salary tends to be more towards the middle of the range of comparable positions, middle to lower. Uh, they do better on benefits. They don't do as well on salary. Uh, but what they really excel in is stability. To Japanese companies, one of the most important things is institutional knowledge. So if they have someone who's been with the company for 5 years, they want that person to stay with the company because they a lot of times they'll try when they're hiring someone outside of the company, what they're really looking for is someone who's been with their company for 5 years. Uh, so, like we were talking about before, layoffs are kind of a
Taboo.
last option. It's when it's either that or the company closes. And if you compare that to a lot of American companies, Japanese companies come off looking very, very nice.
And also
But
for
mm,
benefits too, I will kind of chime in there. I know with JET, many people don't have experience with healthcare because you're
that's a fair point.
graduating and you're coming out of JET. My husband actually works for an American manufacturer, and I work for a Japanese company. And he's Japanese and I'm American, and it's very weird, and we get told that all the time. If we were to pay out of pocket per month for his premiums for covering both of us, you're looking at $450 a month. It is less than half of that for me to go through Pasona. And those are things that they don't really write. Costs of doctors are much higher over here than they are in Japan, and you may have gotten used to that. I will also say a lot of manufacturers in particular have started to provide doctors on site. So there are
Yeah.
several places where they actually have a clinic where their doctor is free to see. They have after hours, you can bring your dependents there with you, and the prescriptions are also free. So those are things that for larger Japanese manufacturers you can also see. I've seen probably 4 or 5 at this point that are large manufacturers, and that's really where the benefit of Japanese companies come. They also have incredible 401k matching. So
Yes.
those are things I don't think we talk about enough. But for me, usually they say that they sometimes spend, $15,000 to $20,000 per family per year for these benefits to really make sure that they are providing for their employees. Sorry to
Right. And
interrupt.
no, absolutely. Because that's something that tends to get left out of the calculation when you're just browsing job descriptions and seeing the number. It's something we work with our clients to encourage them to trumpet more so that they can stand out and attract candidates.
Because Japanese companies tend to pay about 20% less than the market averaged.
Right. And yeah, American companies very much focus more on base salary and less on benefits. So when you start paying for that health insurance, yeah, the sticker shock with average American companies can be a lot worse. And I do think this gets down to some differences in business philosophy. American companies tend to be a lot less stable. There's a lot more focus on, the quarterly projections and less on building a long-term strategy. That can have its advantages as well. American companies tend to be a lot more nimble and move a lot faster, but it does lead to, more mass layoffs. You have to do more job. If you're not happy with your job, it's harder to transfer inside of an American company. It's a lot easier to just hop to a different company. And they tend to put less of a focus on developing their internal employees. Employee is more something you bring on when you need and you let go when you don't need, and not something you're developing for the future. And
But
some
they
people
also,
like that mobility.
yeah. Well, and they also tend to focus more on
Yes.
technical aspects. You're going to get the latest and greatest tech at American companies. You're going to get a higher salary. You're also probably going to get a little bit more workplace flexibility as well. More options to do remote, not remote, things like that. And so like there's two focuses. And like I mentioned, my husband, he is a Japanese individual who picked an American company. And he picked it for a reason, and I picked mine for a reason. And between the two of us, it works. So I know a lot of Jets who've successfully moved to American companies, and they've gotten promoted and they've moved up and they've done very, very well for themselves as well. So, but that is not who we pretty much work with at Pasona. We are focused on the Japanese companies.
Right. And when we think about kind of the big picture differences, and there is a danger of saying, oh, Japanese companies are like this, American companies are like that. What any company is going to be on different parts of these scales in different areas. One of the things that tends to frustrate me about Japanese companies is that they can be very slow on decision making.
Everything.
And everybody has to be consulted. You
5
have to
times.
have a lot of meetings.
10 times.
It's like another thing that can throw people is because of the group focus, you're expected to work to the company's needs instead of working to the job description. And with good companies, that means, hey, we need to take you off of this and have you do this. With bad Japanese companies, it's, hey, we need you to work 50 hours of unpaid overtime a week. So you got to be careful about distinctions within these groups as well.
Yes, I actually started a new title back in April, and they had nothing on the books for it. So they actually wrote a job description for me and created a title because I was hitting the cultural needs that Pasona had, but also hitting the business needs. Yes, the Black companies will prey on you. I worked for a Black company in Japan, so if you want more information on that, please feel free to DM me. That was actually what I did after Jet. I worked at a Black company. For those who do not know what Black companies are, they are companies that are not particularly good to their workers, oftentimes having a lot of unpaid labor, often having a lot of harassment. I will say that is not the rule in America. We have seen some companies like that, and Pasona, we are an ethical partner. So we try very hard. If a company is not ethical and not in line, we do not usually work with them. Just thought I'd let you know.
Americans are a lot more likely to sue.
Correct.
So yeah, we don't want anything to do with companies like that.
Correct. But if you want to hear some stories, Jacob, feel free to ask me because I've heard some stuff. So what
Anything else we want to hit on this one?
I think ultimately, what direction people go in is completely individual. I've worked now for 4 different kinds. I've actually worked for a Japanese company in Japan. I've worked for an American company in Japan. I've worked for an American company in America, and I've worked for a Japanese company in America. Every single company I've worked with has had a benefit. And it really comes down to personal choice. I will say, coming
Absolutely.
back from Jet, competitive advantage wise, if you're free to relocate somewhere for your first few years back on Jet while you're still, I guess, no roots and kind of a wanderer, it's a really great opportunity to jump into some of these places that maybe are not your first choice to live, but just to get your feet wet because they will provide you the tools to be successful in your later career.
Absolutely. And then this is our last slide before we go into Q&A. I do think it's important to know what type of, especially in the US, what type of Japanese company you're working with, because so many of them are putting so much effort into localizing right now. Your traditional Japanese company, branch office, very high formality, everyone's wearing a tie. All of the decisions are being made at the headquarters in Japan. I worked for a very traditional Japanese company, and I had to have an interview with the CEO in Tokyo, even though I wasn't working for his company. So a lot of control from the headquarters. All of the local leadership is going to be Japanese expatriates who are on assignment from the headquarters. And this can lead to a lot of cultural conflict, which can be a good thing. If you like being that bridge builder, if you like being that person who is advising the leadership on the best way to approach a situation, this might be closer to your interest.
I actually had a candidate last year. I placed him and I did his yearly checkup about a month ago. And I asked the company, how he's doing. He came back from Japan, had an into, and worked at a company that has primarily Japanese individual. And they said he is just the best superstar that they've had because he's opened up a lot of their mind to different things and really kind of being that first person. I know even at Pasona, James was the first American recruiter that they've hired at Pasona, and then I came afterwards. So these are really unique opportunities that Jets excel at and really can change. Since James and I started working at Pasona, the recruiting industry has integrated to have Americans. They've never had Americans before. This is in the past 3 years. So there are all of these options that if you want to be that person that can make a change, these are kind of like the front running jobs. So that's just something to keep in mind.
I guess the other thing I've seen from candidates is if they really like order and structure and routine,
Additional.
or Microsoft Excel, the more traditional companies can be a really good fit. On the more localized side, you have a lower level of formality, less ties, more blue jeans, uh, although you'll still want to wear a suit in the interview. More local control, whether that's local American hires or local Japanese hires or local whatever hires, the decisions are being made on the ground level, and the leadership is a mixture of people on assignment from Japan and just people in the area. The company I worked for in Kentucky, our CFO was a Japanese citizen, but he was hired locally. So you'll have people in these different types of situations, more integrated workspace.
And this is great for, I think, Jets who kind of, want to make an impact, but also don't want to have to bend to the Japanese way completely. So it's a middle ground, and that's something it's very nuanced. But I know a Jet, one of my close friends, he works with a localized company, and he loves it because he was hired to be a local person, and he's doing it the American way, and he loves doing it the American way, and he loves sharing the American way with the other side. So it's more of traditional where you're having to bridge the gap by going towards the Japanese side, whereas localized companies, you're helping to bridge the gap, by pulling them closer to you.
Right.
Think about
Yeah,
it in
that's a
that
good way
way.
of putting it. Yeah. And And I do think, this is, if you like having some Japanese influence in the work style, you like working with the Japanese headquarters every now and then, and you don't want to deal with it every day, this is probably more your speed.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I would say Pasona probably is more on the traditional side, but it's moving out now towards a localized. Yeah, Philadelphia is a hard area right now.
Yeah.
It's a hard area. That being said, if you were a CIR, contact me if you want to go to Tennessee. I have a role open. I'm not even joking. They hired a CIR 2 years ago, and they said if we can like run her through a duplicator, they'd like 5 of her. So please let me know.
Yeah, Pennsylvania in general
It's weird.
tends to be fairly limited. Yeah.
There's usually only 1 or 2 jobs there. There's just not a lot of Japanese companies. So
I'm gonna leave this up in the background if you want to contact us directly, but we are going into the Q&A.
Yep.
So feel free to put it in the chat or even to unmute.